All right, friends, welcome. It is week 2 of lecture 3. So it is the end of our second week. It's already flying by. You guys already have fourth done. Isn't that crazy? You are a quarter done with this entire program slash language. Well, not program, sorry, but this language. A little bit of housekeeping. Don't forget your discussion questions are due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. PST. Your core assignments, you have 3 of them, are due Sunday at 11:59 PST. So please make sure you do those. Those assignments consist of putting it together, hook forms and more forms. So please make sure you get those done. As a reminder, also, I will be out next Tuesday. And so you will have a guest instructor, Robert. He's going to crush it. Garrett's going to be talking in office hour. It's going to be awesome. So overall, it's going to be a good day. But I will be out of office, but I will be back Wednesday. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up there. Want to talk a little bit about a recap. We have a couple things to recap, actually. We have forms in lifted state. And yesterday we created some forms where we created a component and we had some forms. This was not yesterday's code. This is something we did in office hour. But really all we did is we talked about, okay, we can create these forms here. And I just put these in a div so that way it looks a little bit nicer, right? And it puts them on a new line because divs are block scoped. And so, but all we did yesterday was created a label. We talked about an input, right? And what is the main thing within an input? What is a huge sort of attribute that we have to keep track of and know for kind of this section and how we're coding this? What's something that's really important for us to be mindful of? Exactly, Brittany, it's name. And can anybody tell me, Brittany, why is that important?
I think it's because it's like the key that you need for the function that you are passing through.
Exactly. So this is a really important attribute if you're going to do it like this, right? If you're not going to put this all in one object, and like we have here, so we did some lifted state in office hour and lifted state up here, but here we have this entire object that we created and had them all in one versus having something like this where we could say const, movie title, set movie title. We could have something like that and have them each individual and broken down. Where we could have movie year and movie views and movie genre. I could do this and you state. And if I was going to do that, then all I would have to do is on the actual input itself, instead of running this, I could have maybe a handler that does that, or I could just do that in line if I wanted to, right? Or I could just say something to where I just take in the event and then say set movie or set movie title and then pass in the event dot value dot target dot value. But if we're going to do this all as one, right, we're not going to do it separated out like this. We're going to do it all as one object. Then yes, Brittany is 100% right. The name is really important. And remember, the reason is because when we run set movie, we are spreading this out. We're grabbing all of the information we have within my movie, right? And then specifically, we're saying, hey, look at this key within my movie object. And the key that we're referring to is whatever this e.target.name. So this value here. And we're saying, hey, if you've got this key, let me put this up here side by side. This key of title, I want to change that to whatever the value is on my input. Now, one thing we talked about in office hour is that inputs don't have a value here, right? There's no value. Now, if we were to do it this way and we had it separated out, if we had wanted to, you can have a value here to where maybe you would say something like, if you had it all separated out, maybe you had it like movie title. You could do that. Let's say that this was my state. I could have this here. I can have that. It doesn't hurt anything. But with this input, it's actually implied, right? The value of the input is just whatever is typed. And so you don't have to put it. It's just going to infer that. The thing that we talked about in office hour is that there is another type, right, that we can do. We can have a drop down where we still have a name on my select. So it's not my input. We have a select, we have our name, but this is where it's really important to have our value. The reason is because we need to know, well, which option did they choose, right? Which value do we associate to this submission, this form, this, sort of in our case, this movie. And so when we have each option, even if you had 100 of them or you just had one of them, you need to make sure you put this value portion and actually fill that out. So that way, when we are updating state, it says, okay, for genre, I want to add in, let's say we selected action, I want to add in action. So that way now we have associated this genre of action with my movie. And so that is our select. So if you have a drop down, that's how we handle this. You still have the on change. You just handle the name on the select, and then your option has the value. Okay. Now, what I want to talk about is what we did in office hour. What we did in office hour is we talked about how on our form component yesterday, what we did is we had a form, and then right under that, we had some p tags or we had a div or whatever. We actually showed the information kind of immediately, right? We just showed it as we typed it, updated. We just were reflecting state. Well, the real benefits of components and single page applications, like what we talked about, is that we can actually alter things and switch them in and out. So what we want to do is actually use the power of single page applications to not put everything in one sort of monolithic. It's what it's called when it's sort of all in just one file. It's called like monolithic coding. We don't want to have one sort of monolithic file that has my display and my form and maybe something else, right? We want to make sure we compartmentalize everything, bring them out, because what if I want to display that somewhere else, right? I can abstract it from just all in one file to multiple components. I can still throw it in, make it look exactly the same, but now I have a little bit more flexibility. So that's exactly what we did. We had my form and we had my form component, and all we had in the form was, in the form component, we just put simply just the form. That's it. We didn't add anything else. We didn't do anything different. What we also did is we created a new component called display that displayed all of my information. Now, remembering we talked about lifted state yesterday, and just as a reminder, is state cannot travel from child to parent, nor can it travel from sibling to sibling, right? So right now, let's just kind of draw out my current state structure. I've got this guy here. Maybe I've got this guy here and this guy here. Great. This is my current structure, right? This top portion is my app.jsx, right? That is the parent to all of my components at the moment, right? We have our component, our app.jsx is what's actually calling both components. You can kind of see that here on the edge of my screen. So this is what we call our parent. These guys are just simply children, right? This is on this side, I've got my form, and this side is my display. And they are children of the app, but they are siblings to one another. So let's pretend that this right here is my state, this cool little ball thing. Actually, let's go a different color. Let's pretend this is my state, right? Well, when we abstracted and said, I want my display to be able to show the information of my movie, if all the information is in my actual form, right? I cannot take my state and pass it over to display because siblings cannot share that. So what we have to do for lifted state is actually take my state and pass it up to the parent. Does it have to be, let's say that you had another, like you have your app.jsx and then you have another component that houses two more components? You don't have to pass it all the way up to the top piece. You don't have to put everything into JSX. Let's say that you had, another one. So that you had like two things here. Well, if that's the case, and let's say your state was here and you want it to go side by side, you don't have to take the state all the way up to the JSX and then pass it down to form and then pass it down. You can just push it here, right? Just to the parent of the components that you're talking about. I hope that makes sense. So what we did is we said, okay, let's go ahead and let's pass our state. This is what we did in office hour. Let's take our state from our form and we're going to pass it all the way up to my parents. Now, again, because the hierarchy is we only have two components and then one parent, we just put it up to sort of this root portion, this app.jsx. That's where we said, okay, let's lift my state. Now that we've done that, what we can do is we can actually take my information and give it to each component. I can take my state and I can now pass that down, right? I lifted it up and now I can pass it down to any children I have. If I had another component, like maybe a third component, I could still pass this over, right? Even if there's a whole bunch of siblings, I can pass it over as much as I want. Cool. Any questions on this kind of lifting state idea? And then we're going to look at what we did in code. Any questions kind of off the jump? No, we talked about it yesterday, but I want to kind of dive in more today. I know we're hitting the ground running. I just got quite a bit of stuff I want to show you. Okay, cool. Let me clear all this junk out. Okay, so we actually did that. So that was sort of the theory behind it. But we actually did that. We took our state, you come here, and we said, okay, great, let's add this up to my parent. And now within my app, I have my use state. I don't need any of this junk. And I pass it down to my children. Now, the way that we pass information down to components is via props. And so all I have to do is I say my prop name, movie, equals, and then this is movie, right? It's just going to say this guy, this is my getter right here. This is my movie object. Set movie is my set movie function. Now, this is something that's kind of important. So just want to make sure you guys get this. And if you have questions, please ask. You don't have to pass down everything. If you lift state, notice my form component needs movie so that way I can update it, right? And it needs the set movie. I need to be able to set my values. I need to be able to run that when things change, right? When things change, I need to run this function. When I'm talking about displaying, or when I'm just displaying, if I'm not needing to alter the information, I don't need to give it set movie, right? If I'm just wanting to read this, then that's fine. I don't need to pass in set movie. Notice here that I just am only passing in my movie object. Now, would it hurt anything if I had set movie here? Absolutely not, right? It's not going to break anything. But there's this idea of kind of least privilege in tech. It's really big in like cloud computing, but really you just give access, as much access as is needed, so that you kind of, if you just give everybody all access to the cloud, well, then there can be chaos, right? Because maybe people don't know what they're doing or they can kind of mess up. And so it's kind of least privilege is an idea of like, you only give what you need and you don't want to give too much, because if you don't give too much, then there's less room for error. You can kind of make this same approach here. I see this in the chat as well. I will absolutely talk about the change handler. But you can see this same thing here, right? We don't need set movie, so I don't want to accidentally redo or resubmit or reset my information. So I'm just not even going to give this component access to do that. If I need to in the future, let's say I wanted to, next week, we're going to talk about like deleting inline. It's not really how we're going to do that. Yesterday, I talked about how or Tuesday, one of them. There's going to be a couple things in the next couple weeks that we're going to do that doesn't really reflect how we're going to do it in the long run. It's just kind of what we have to do with the knowledge that we have currently. One of those is going to be deleting from some sort of list. We're not ever going to do that because you're going to have a database and that's how you're going to store data. But so we might bring in set movie there. But all that being said, right now, for what we're doing, we're just wanting to show information. We don't have to give in this function. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I know that there's a question on this. I'm happy to explain it again, but are there any questions on lifted state? Okay, great. So there's a question in the chat. Can you explain the change handler again? Absolutely. There's two things that we did last week. Let me actually go back. I'm going to do this. CD. Do this. So I can go back and forth to the code that we did yesterday because I think I commented out a couple things. Cool. So yesterday, what we did is we had this forms. This was our intro to forms. We had our components, and we have our form component. This is one version that we did where we had everything sort of segmented out, right? All of my state was separated, where I had an individual piece of state for title, for year, for views. And when these things changed, I had a handler for each of them. Handle title, handle year, handle views, where I just basically used my setter to grab the value. So anytime it changed, even if it added a letter, deleted a letter, whatever, did a space, anytime it changed, it's running this handle title. This is a synthetic event within JavaScript or within React, sorry, that always passes an event. Now those events change. So an on change is different than like a on click synthetic event, right? It's still going to pass in an event, just the material inside of it might be different. So an on submit event is going to look a little bit different than an on change. But that's kind of granular, not something you need to know right now. But regardless, knowing that this on change, this on submit, on click, they are all synthetic events that are going to generate an event object that is being passed through. And we looked at this yesterday, right? Where we said, okay, I want to look at this. And we went in and we said, okay, my event had a key of target. And within that had a key of value. And I can actually grab and retrieve that information. Now, the way that that worked is because the target is basically the line that called my handler. And so it's just saying the value that's being passed in through this input. Right? We don't technically need the name here. That's okay. But it doesn't hurt anything. Now I did this for each individual piece of state. Then the second thing I showed was, well, what if we want to do this all as one object? Right? And we could have our state, instead of being 3 individual pieces of state, I could just do it as one piece of state. Instead, it's just an object. And so each of those are just their own key value pair. Now, the tricky thing is, though, is that if we're doing this and we have an on change, we're still having this event happen, right? It's still being spurred by a specific input. So whether I filled out the movie title or I filled out the year or the views, whatever I did, that on change event is happening. And so if I only recorded the information from that e.target.value, right, then it's going to negate all the other information we've already done, right? Because all we know when this event happens is the value being passed in from that input tag. So the way around that is I don't need a console log. I run set movie. And this is my function. That's my setter. And I'm saying, hey, go in to the movie object and I want you to spread that out. Basically, grab everything you already have. So if this event's happening, And let's say we start it at the very top, right? And I write in the first letter of W, and it causes this event to happen. It's going to spread out movie, and all it's going to have is title as an empty string, year as an empty string, views as an empty string. That's fine, but it's still going to grab all of my keys for me, right? It's going to grab the entire object. It's going to spread it out and say, I've got title, year, and views all spread out. Those are my keys that I have. I said, okay, great. Now go into the key of, go into the key that matches this value here, this e.target.name. What e.target.name is e.target is this entire input, this HTML. We saw this yesterday when we coded, or when we, console logged. It's this specific input, like the whole thing. Well, with that, I can say, now go to my name attribute, e.target.name, and get this value here, title, right? Remember, it is imperative that this name matches what is up here. Can anybody remember what happens if it doesn't match? What happens if I added an extra L here?
It creates like a whole new key value pair.
Exactly. JavaScript, when we're dealing with objects, if you call a key, it's going to go in and it's going to look for that key. And if it doesn't find it, it's going to say, oh, they must have wanted to create a new one. So it creates a new one for you. So that's why these have got to match here. And that's where those React developer tools really come in handy, because we can go in and make sure that my state is correct. And if it's not updating the way we thought, we can see if we have any sort of spelling errors. So what it's saying is, hey, okay, I've spread out movie, and at this point, it's already got a title, a year, views. They're all empty strings, but that's okay. Now I'm saying, now go to this key, title, and its value I want you to give it is the value that's passed through in my input. Now remember, by default, whatever's passed in my input is just whatever I type. So if I've got a form and I write, W for Walter, that W is the value that's being passed in every time. So it's going to, if I just passed in W, it's going to say, hey, go find title, and its value is W. It's going to say, okay, great. So if after I were to console, console.log movie, I would just have title equals W, year as an empty string, and views as an empty string. But if I were to console log it up here, I'm going to just have this empty object. So we have our empty object. Then when we run set movie, it spreads out all that information. I target the specific key that I'm dealing with that matches my input. And then I say set it equal to this. What this does is, let's say that, so at the very beginning, I do W, right? And so we talked about maybe that now my title's value is just W. Well, let's say that I just go to year. That was the movie. And I go to year, and I type in 1999. Well, what it's going to do is it's going to run handle movie. It's going to come up here. It's going to say set movie. It's going to grab that information I currently have. So it's going to grab this W, right? Because that's what my movie currently is. Then it's going to say, hey, this target.name of year, its new value is 1999. It's going to go, okay, great. And then let's say that I do views and I run that. Again, it's going to go grab the information I currently have. So this way, by spreading this out, and make sure that we can retain information. If I didn't do this, I didn't spread this out, what this does is it just gets rid of, and it doesn't have any memory of anything that I changed. So all you're going to have is the last thing you did, the last handle movie call. That's all the values ever going to be in your state. So I have to make sure I grab all the information first. Does that make a little bit more sense? Shafkat, does that help? Cool. Okay, great. Now what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit. So that's what we did. What we did was we just took our state and we passed it in up to our app.jsx. Had that, we passed it in through props. One thing I did talk about too is there's a couple of different ways you can handle props. You can actually destructure in your passing of props. Maybe it's this. Is that why it's not liking it? No, I don't know. I don't know why my linter. We saw that it works, but it was showing an error in office hours. So I'm not sure why it's not liking this, but could just be a linter thing. I can actually destructure here and just say movie, set movie. This is the same as saying const movie, set movie equals props. This is doing the same thing. It just is kind of a shortcut. So if you know that you have just those two things you're passing in, you can just do this with props, and then you can refer to movie and set movie the same way. But I pass it in, and now I can still set my movie. I can still spread out my movie. And we saw that this works just fine. Cool. Now, what I want to talk about is some conditional rendering, right? And so maybe if we come here, let me kind of navigate back. Oh, whoops. Sorry. I was in the right. I was thinking lecture 2. Okay. Let's get this running again. Perfect. Let's come here. And we have this information, and we saw that this worked. If I type W, it already takes W. It's changing my state in my app, JSX, passing it down to my display. We destructure movie, and I can see movie.title. Remember, because this is an object, we grab this information. Cool. Great. Now let's say that I wanted to have it to where I want to make sure that if this isn't any sort of validation from like a database perspective, this is just sort of visualization. This is going to be really handy when you get to to-do list. Just kind of want to point this one out. This is the hardest assignment of the course. Just going to be blunt with you. But we're gonna do a lot of stuff in office hour next week to make sure you guys are fully prepared. Like we're gonna talk about checkboxes next week and some styling. The delete. This is the delete functionality I was talking about. That you don't really do that because you don't have a database, but we're gonna have to do it in a weird way. So we're gonna make sure we do that. But I wanted to show you some conditional rendering or conditional styling. Sorry, to kind of make sure. I don't know why I said conditional rendering. Conditional styling to make sure that you guys kind of are able to see that, and we can sort of start giving some errors within our forms. So let's go to my form, and I have some information here, right? I've got a div that's got my movie title and my on change. Now, what I can do, remember, if you guys remember back in the day, kind of when we first started with JSX, I showed that I can do sort of anything in this. Once I do curly brackets, that is me saying I want to inject some JavaScript, right? I want JavaScript to happen. And if I wanted it to show 5 + 5, I can make it I can do that. I do 5 + 5 and it will automatically run it and do 10, right? So anytime we're within our JSX, we can inject and do some JavaScript functionality by just doing this curly bracket. Cool. Now, what I want to do is I want to, and we talked about ternaries, but we're going to build them now, is I want to do a ternary operator. Within JSX, you cannot do like an if, else, anything like that, right? You can't do an if, else kind of broken out. So we need to do this at least within my form, not within my return. You can absolutely do it above your return. So I want to make sure that that's a clarification. Just within your HTML code. So this is where the ternary operator really comes in handy. It's where it really comes in handy, right? Okay. So what we're doing here is we can say if movie dot title. And remember, because we have an object here, or because we pass in this entire object, we do have to say movie dot title dot length. So if you do it this way, you would just say movie dot title dot length. Now, if you did do it the other way, and that's, I just want to point this out because people often in exams get confused by this. If you do it this way, you would just say title dot length, right? So maybe I'll build both out and then we can see. Yeah, let's go back here. Okay. So I can say movie dot title dot length. If that's less than 2, this is my condition. So top portion is my condition. And then I can say what to do if true. Else what to do. Ooh. Cool. Now this could all be on one line, but I'm just kind of breaking this down so that way you guys can see it a little bit easier. But we have my condition. If I say, hey, if it's less than 2, okay, I'm making sure that people know that it needs to be more than 2 characters, two or more. My question mark, remember this is a ternary operator, so this is saying, okay, my condition's done. Now, the first thing is what to do if that's true. If the movie.title.length is true, or if it's less than 2 and that's true, then I want to put in a p tag that says title must be at least 2 characters. Else, so that's what this colon is. You can put an empty string, that's fine, or you could just say null. So now what this does is if I go to my form, you can see that it says title must be at least 2 characters. And if I say WA, it goes away. Once that condition is no longer true, it goes away. Now I can do that for all of them. So that's title. Maybe I can say something like movie.title.year is not, is less than, let's say 2000. Must be a recent-ish, recent movie. Cool. And then maybe maybe I don't have one for total views because it's okay if it doesn't have that. Or maybe I just say something like movie dot views. Nope, sorry, movie dot, it's not title. Dot length. Sorry, this is movie dot year. Is less than that. This is a string, so we need this dot length, but this is not, so we should be okay. Let's see. This is giving me an error here. All these comments are stressing me out. So if I were to movie.year less than 2000, the year's a number.
It's still broken down in state as a string though, right? In the object.
Oh yeah.
So we might have to put the 2000 in string in quotes. That's what I'm thinking.
That or we could just fix our state to be
Sure. Also, just to mention with that lint focus stuff, just something to note on your bottom left of the screen, it says sonar lint focus overall code. Click into that and you might be able to either Maybe that's something we can look into after this. Don't want to derail anything.
Yeah, for sure. The saying movie.title is missing prop, but we don't need that. We have that. Oops, cancel. Because this should, let's see. Okay, friends, we're seeing that sometimes life happens and things mess up. So let's comment this out. I don't know what I did different. And then, oh, it's this is what broke. That's why. It's because I was saying movie dot. So this was actually fine. I was stuck on that. Let's see. Movie dot views. Let's comment this one out and then see if it is working. Okay. Yeah, so it was because I said movie dot down here, but then I had this linter error. So yes, Garrett's exactly correct. So a linter is just something that you can do that can kind of give you some suggestions. That doesn't inherently mean that there's an error here. Sometimes this, it doesn't like the way that it's set up, or there might be certain coding sort of structures or paradigms that it's trying to follow that can be confusing. So make sure that, if you have a yellow squiggly line, but your code works, what's more important is your code working. Now, if you were to go to like inspect and you see your console and you got some like red errors here, that's something you really kind of want to look at. If you have some bigger errors, but if you just have a linter error and you're like, what is going on? This doesn't make sense. You can view the problem, or if it does work and you don't have any console log errors here, then you can kind of just don't worry about it. At least not now. And if you want to do a deep dive, you totally can. But if I do 2001, we see that goes away. So the number does work. Just remembering that because I was doing dot length, I had to do movie.title.length. But here, because this is just a number, I can do 2000. Or if I wanted to say something like movie.title.views is less than 10, then I say question mark. I can do a P tag or null. And then I might say sheesh. Movie doesn't even have at least 10 views. Okay. So now if I come here, I got some information. So this is a way that if I do, 11, cool. So this is my conditional rendering. This is the way that I can show some conditions. Now, one little thing that we can do, so you see that even by default. So at the beginning of our form, we already have this information. And that kind of doesn't make for a good experience, right? Like, can you imagine going to a form and automatically it's giving you errors in red and all that stuff? Not fun. So what you can do is you can actually add on a and movie dot year does not equal 0. So now, because I did this, so if it does not equal 0, which by default we set it to, meaning that they've changed it to something. So let's say 1999, okay, must be a recent-ish movie, right? I wonder what it's passing in now. We see that 2001 it is. So let's see, what is my state, you think, right now? This is where we use our components. We go to form, movie, year. So when it goes default, because there's nothing in there, it is going to default to a string, which means that this happens because there's no value here. Interesting. Cool. So we can change this here. And so we can say the same thing if we come to our form and we say, and movie dot title dot length does not equal 0. Let's get rid of that first one, and then we'll do the same here. I don't know if we can do. Trying to finish. Movie dot year does not equal. Let's try that. See if I'm that fixed. If we can get that sort of edge case. So that way, if we refresh this, nothing's there. If I say W, we get an error. If I say this, we get an error. But if I go back, we're good because now it's a string. Okay, so now we're fixed. Cool. So that's conditional rendering. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on what we're doing? We can also do some inline styling here. We have like style equals color is red. Let's see.
I think you just need 2 brackets around it.
Around this guy?
Yeah, in total. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Cool. So if year is 1, 2, you can see that we can change this color too. So this is going to come in handy with to-do lists when we are dealing with, you're going to have to do some sort of crossing out. I would look at how do we do crossing out? What does that look like? And we can just go in here. We can do some conditional rendering. We can do some, this is inline styling. If you wanted to do your CSS and you had like an actual CSS file and you had a class that associated that, you could absolutely do that. Basically saying, hey, if this is the case, then add a p tag with this class. And if it's not, do a p tag with this class. That works just fine. If you want to do some inline styling, I won't knock you off like we did in Web Fundamentals, because this is a really popular thing as well. I mean, you'll see it all over. So, okay, so this is a main thing. This is a main thing I wanted to focus on. Are there any questions for this? You guys, does this make sense? You guys put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. Okay. Great. Okay, let's go back here. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about today? That. So I normally don't have a bunch of stuff. Okay, so we talked about this. All right. So now I also want to talk about this idea of higher order functions, and I think we have 15 minutes. I think we'll introduce higher order functions, callbacks, talk about map quickly, and maybe not filter, but I will be doing I'm going to kind of focus on higher order functions and callback functions, and then talk about map and filter, just kind of in a quick introduction. And the next week, maybe on Wednesday, the whole class. I know Garrett, you're doing the class on Tuesday. Maybe we can push that to like Thursday or something.
Yeah,
so
the
that
object master on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe we can push that to Thursday. And so that way on Wednesday I can do on our office hour, I'll plan on doing a map and filter walkthrough. So that way we can get that handled. Unless you wanted to kind of walk through that on Tuesday, but we can talk about that offline.
Okay. I'll definitely hit map and filter just briefly going into the whole object master. But yeah, we can talk about it after.
Perfect. Okay. So I have this other JS file here. Now just know that this is just strictly JavaScript. So it's not anything to do with our not anything to do with our sort of JSX, but I want to talk about this idea of higher order functions. And what that is it's a higher level kind of thing. I want to kind of go to higher order functions. MDN Docs usually has a great kind of walkthrough. Or was it Geeks for Geeks? Yeah. So what a higher order function is basically a function that receives another function as an argument. Right? It is a function that receives another function as an argument. And then it returns either a new function or both, right? So it is going to take in some sort of function. So here, I've got an example here because I think it might be easier to code. I've got this function of greet. Well, this is our callback function. So let me backtrack. A higher order function is a function that takes in another function as an argument. Paired with that is what we call a callback function. The function that's being passed into the higher order function is what we call a callback function. Okay, let me repeat that. Is higher order function is a function that takes in a function as an argument, and the function that it takes in as an argument is what we call a callback function. So it looks a little bit like this. Let's say that I've got this function called greet, right? That I pass in a name, and then I console log and I say hello name. Cool. Well, then I also have this other function called say name that just takes in an argument called callback. And it says const, or takes in a function called callback. Const name equals John, and then I say callback name. Right? My higher order function is say name. The callback function is called callback. So when I say name, and I call this, and then I pass in greet. Greet is my callback function. And so what it's going to do, what the computer is going to do is it's going to read this top part, right? Remember, JavaScript goes top to bottom. So I'm going to read this and say, okay, great, I have a function. Let me save this for later. I know I might reuse this. I might use it quite a few times. I'm going to save this for later. Gets to this line 19 and it says, okay, same thing. I've got a function called say name. It hasn't been invoked yet, so I'm going to save it for later. And it just keeps this information. It doesn't go through and run any of this because the function hasn't been called yet. Now, when it gets to line 24, we call and invoke the function say name. So it says, okay, great. I have say name. It takes in a callback. Right? It takes in, this is called callback. This could be called unicorn if we wanted. We know that it just takes in a parameter. Now, we haven't set it to any type or anything like that, but we know that this is a function, right? Because we need to call that right here. So it stops and says, okay, say name. It goes, it brings in this function, which we've given it. It says const name John. So we have this name John. And then now we are going to invoke the function that's passed in. So invoke my callback function. And we're going to give it name. So it's going to stop right here. It invokes and runs this function here. That says function greet that takes in a value of name, which we've given it, which is John. And so it's going to console log hello name. So then once this is done running, it comes back to this function, my higher order function, and we see that it is done here. But if I had, some extra lines, it would continue on. So if I run this, I get hello, John. My higher order function is the function that takes in another function as an argument. They have some other qualities too. They can create new functions. We can do a whole bunch of things with that, but that's going to be really important when we start talking about map and we start talking about filter, because map and filter are these higher order functions, right? They take in other functions, create and do some sort of information with it. So really, from a sort of high level, the thing you need to know is a higher order function All it simply is a function that takes in another function as an argument. That function that it takes in is what we call a callback function. So if you're ever passing in a function as a parameter, that function itself is a callback, and the function that is taking that in is just our higher order function. It's a little bit high level, a little bit kind of granular, but those are really the few things you need to know about that. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on that? Okay. I want to kind of give a glimpse of why that's important and what it's doing. And it's because we're going to use this tool called map. We're going to use this really frequently. We're going to kind of build onto this next week. But all map does is it is a function that takes in another function, and it will apply each item. So really from a high level, it's just kind of iterating through and doing and applying some sort of functionality to each instance within my array. So if I say array.map, this is the one I think MDN docs. That's a good, oops. Yeah. So this is a method of an array. Now, within our data types, we had talked about we can do certain things with certain data types. This is like the first class. With numbers, we can do some addition. With strings, we can do specific things. With arrays, we can do specific things to get its length. We can get it by index position. We can do a whole bunch of stuff. And that's because each of these types are called what we call a class, right? And so if you've taken any sort of full stack application or full stack languages like Python or Java, you're probably familiar with what a class is. All a class is really a blueprint, right? In the same way, it's like a blueprint of a car, or there's a whole bunch of things that we're going to talk about classes towards the end, but it's really just kind of a blueprint, a layout of some sort of functionality. Well, within that, there are some functions or some things that it can actually do, right? That are called methods. Methods are just functions associated to a class. And so this map is just a method of the class of array. So if we have an array, just a high level, if we have an array, just know that it has different methods in the same way that when I say something like, when I say something like console.log r.length, .length is just a method of my array. Because it's this is a type of array, this is a method, this is a functionality that all arrays can do, and it comes and it gives me a length. Console.log, right, allows us to, it's just a methodology of console. And so what this does is it allows us to create a new array. So that's one thing to know, is that map always gives you back a new array. It doesn't alter the original array at all. It gives you back a new array, and we can do anything, or we can do some sort of functionality to it. So here's an example is, let's say I had this array here, array 1 of 1, 4, 9, and 16. Well, because it gives me a new array, I create a variable of const. I say array1.map. You can sort of think about this again as doing a for loop, right? It iterates through each one of these. For each is another kind of way that you can sort of think about it, but mapping goes from this instance to this instance to this instance to this instance. Now, what it does is it gives you back three things. It gives you the value, it gives you the index position, and it gives you the whole array. So map, anytime we run .map, we have access to three things. The value that it's currently at. So if it starts here, you know, it's this value, then it goes to this value, then that value. The index position it's currently at, and the whole array if we wanted. Now, what's nice about this is, let's say I wanted to do something like this. I wanted to multiply every one of these by 2. Sure, I could create a for loop and I could say, okay, at this index, at the position of I want to do this and add and pop and push to another. I want to push to another array. Like, I could do all that, but map does that for us. It's doing the same thing, but it's iterating through. And the things, remember, the things that it gives us is the actual number itself, the index, and the whole array. I don't have to use all 3. So if I come to my, if I come here, let's say I just do something like this. I don't want to do this. I'd rather follow it just like this. Cool. Okay, let's look at what's going on here. So this new array is being created. We're taking this current array and we are mapping through. We are iterating through each individual instance within my array. What I have access to, again, I'm going to call this num. I'm going to call this IDX. And I'm going to call this, WA for whole array. Now, I'm not using these, but I have access to them. But those are the only 3 things I have access to. If I were to, and they have to be in this position as well. And so if I were to call this IDX, these are just arbitrary names, right? WA is for whole array. This could be unicorn, cupcakes, and rainbows. It doesn't matter. The naming convention itself isn't important. It's just this specific order. It goes the number or the instance, whatever you're dealing with in your array, because it doesn't always have to be a number, right? In this case, it does because it's easier. The index position and then the whole array. So if I were to actually do this, and I were to say console log all 3 and then return num2, let's run this. I'm going to run this. So you see that the first thing it does is it grabs the first number, 1. Right? It gives me the index position of 0. And then I get the whole array. WA. So it's going to do that. It's going to run through all of these. Right? It console logs this first array. And then what it also does, though, is it returns num times 2. So it takes all of these values, returns, or does this to each of them. And because this is set to the new array, my new array is, it goes to 1, num times 2, 2, 2, num times 2, 4, and so on and so forth. And so now my entire array, if I want some sort of functionality to be applied towards my entire array, I can use something like .map. Now, again, I don't need these two. So I just wanted to say num. And then I run this. I just get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I'm console logging num each time. And then I do my whole array, my original array, and then my new array, because it gives me back a new array every single time. So that's .map. Again, because this is a taking in a function, this is my higher order function. This is what we call a callback function. But that's just, I kind of want to give you guys a glimpse, and I'd encourage you guys over this weekend to kind of deal with this. Filter operates in the same way, except what it does is instead of this, you give it a condition. And then it'll return all the values that don't meet that condition. So like if you wanted to get rid of all of them that started with will, right? If you had a whole bunch of names, you said will, it'll go and it will do that. Are there any questions on map? No, it's kind of a high level thing. We'll keep digging into it. Garrett's going to dig into it on Tuesday. Are there any questions or what we talked about today? Anything that we are dealing with? I will make sure that this code, see. Cool. So that code is there. Just like Garrett said, map is something we're going to get lots of exposure to. So don't worry about if that doesn't inherently make sense. We're going to get lots of practice with it. And we're going to take, let's say we had a list of movies, we're going to be able to iterate through and do something to them, whether that's just show them or manipulate them in some way, we can do that. So just wanted to give you guys a sort of glimpse of higher order functions and callback functions in map. So that way you guys going into the weekend can start playing with that. And then we'll really hit on it next week, map and filter. So any other questions, friends? Okay, that's all I have for you. Hope you guys have a wonderful night, and I will see you next Wednesday.